Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. I'm Huck. Today I'm doing my October reading predictions. So these are all of the books that I'm predicting I will want to read in October. And then, we'll see what happens because mood reading happens. But these are the ones I'm thinking about. So the first book that I have is Vengeful by V.E. Schwab. So this is the second book in the Villains series. I think it's a duology. That the first one is Vicious, and this came out last year, I think, and I just haven't gotten around to reading it. This was on my fall TBR for this year, so I need to get to it. October seems like a good month to read it. And this is, again, following all the characters from the first book with some added new characters in it. I think I've been avoiding reading this because I'm afraid I won't like it. So Vicious was the first book by V.E. Schwab that I read, and I loved it. And it was one of my favorite books of the year that I read it. What was it, 2017? Something like that. It was really good. No, it was 2018. Whatever. I loved it. I've read some of her other books since then, and I always have a fun time reading V.E. Schwab's books, but I haven't really loved them. And part of that is because of a character trope that she uses for her strong female characters that I just don't like her interpretation of what a strong female character means. And from what I have heard, this book does contain some of those same character tropes. So I'm not super excited about that. And yeah, I loved Vicious a lot. I loved it as a standalone, and I'm a little bit afraid that I won't like this sequel that is coming so many years later, but I need to finally read it. So hopefully gonna be reading this in October. The next book that I have from my fall TBR is The Golden Fool by Robin Hobb. This was tentatively on my September reading predictions list, but I didn't really think I was gonna get to it that month. I didn't, so now I need to get to it in October because I'm trying to finish this trilogy before the end of the year, and of course I left it until the end of the year to even start this trilogy of chunky, very chunky, long, thick, dense books. So, gotta get to it this month. As I said, this is the second book in the series of the Tawny Man trilogy. The first was Fool's Errand. I have a review for that I'll link below if you would like to see my thoughts on the first book in the trilogy. And this takes place in the realm of the Elderlings. And I've been talking about this series a lot recently because I've been trying to work my way through it in the last couple months. So, you've probably heard me talk about this plenty by now. So other than those two that are from my fall TBR, I have a couple of other books that I'm looking at, one of which is House of Salt and Sorrows by Erin A. Craig. I recently hauled this one, I think. And this is a 12 Dancing Princesses retelling that has a dark Moorish seaside setting. I've heard from people that it is a lot creepier or scarier than they were expecting it to, that it has some horror elements to it. So I thought this might be a good one to read in October. In general, I don't really change my reading seasonally. So for me, this is as close as it is going to get for a seasonal reading, spooky TBR kind of thing, is one book in my predictions that I have heard has some creepy and or scary and or horror elements to it. But yeah, that's about the extent. But I am excited about this one, and hearing that it has some scarier elements to it has made me more interested in it. So we're gonna see how this goes. I'm excited. Another book that has kind of caught my eye recently that I was kind of surprised that I was interested in, was Burn Bright by Patricia Briggs. This is an urban fantasy that is, I think, the 5th book in the Alpha and Omega series, which is a spin-off from the Mercy Thompson series. And this series, for one, it's an urban fantasy, which is not usually my genre. I'm not a big fan of urban fantasy most of the time. This is pretty much the only urban fantasy that I still follow, and the kind of urban fantasy that has werewolves and vampires, because I generally don't really like werewolves and vampires. But But this is one that I've been reading for a very long time. The Mercy Thompson series has like 11 books in it or something, and then the spin-off series, this is like the 5th book. So like I've been reading this series for years, so I feel like I'm like in pretty deep with this. So I keep getting the books. Anyways, I have not read this one yet. I do feel like this series is kind of losing me a little bit, so I'm not sure how much longer I'm going to hold on to it and like continue reading these books. As I said, it is a urban fantasy romance, I guess, that has like werewolves in it. There are also vampires, but it's mostly about the werewolves. And this one is pretty short. I think it's like not even 300 pages. So maybe I'll read this one. I feel like a lot of the other books that I'm planning on are a lot longer and like denser, and this one I think would just be a little bit more light and easy to read. So maybe if I feel like I need a break from those, I could read this one. I don't know, for some reason this one's just caught my eye recently. And then I have a few audiobooks that I've been looking at. A lot of times I don't include audiobooks on my like predictions lists, but for some reason this month I decided I would do audiobooks too. So the first one is one that I have a physical copy of as well, which is Ink Death by Cornelia Funk. This is quite chunky, but this is a middle grade book that is the 3rd in the Ink World series. The first one is Ink Heart and the second is Ink Spell. And I've been reading this series this year and really enjoying it. It's just like a really fun series, and since I've been looking for books about books, this is a series that is like a book about books, because we're following a father and daughter, Mo and Maggie, who are able to read things out of books. When they read out loud, they can pull characters and objects out of the fictional books that they are reading about, and it just is about their adventures and how they use like these powers and how it affects the stories that they're pulling these characters from, and how it affects the world that they're in, all of this stuff. But yeah, so this is just like a really fun series that I've been enjoying reading, and I would like to finish by the end of the year since I only have one more book to read. And I've been listening to the audiobooks and really liking them, although every single audiobook has had a different narrator, which like each time I get over it eventually, but I don't love it that there's a different narrator every time. I would prefer consistency. And then I'm expecting to read some other audiobooks as well this month, but one that I especially have my eye on is A Sorcery of Thorns by Margaret Rogerson, which recently came out and is also another book about books. I mean, you've probably seen it because it's all over BookTube. I can't remember now what it's about, and I don't have a physical copy of this one, but I do know that it follows a girl who is learning to be a librarian, I think, in a magical library that houses these grimoires, which are books that hold magic in them, and then that magic that is infused in the book kind of gives it a personality. So these books come alive and have their own personalities, but they have to be very carefully guarded to protect the books, but also to protect the rest of the world, because I think if anything bad happens to the books, it can release like bad magic into the world and bad stuff happens. That's my understanding of what happens in this book. Now, this is one I said a lot of people have been reading, and I've heard a lot of really good things about it, and it's a book about books, so I'm excited about that. But earlier this year, in I think July, I read An Enchantment of Ravens by Margaret Rogerson, which was her debut, and I didn't really like it. I didn't hate it, but I also really did not enjoy it. So I'm not so sure about continuing with her books. But I've heard really good things about A Sorcery of Thorns, and people say that it's better than An Enchantment of Ravens, and that like she's grown as an author and that kind of stuff, so that makes me optimistic. So the compromise that I have come to for myself is that I'll listen to the audiobook, that I'm not going to buy the physical book unless I listen to the audiobook and absolutely love it. I've heard that it's very atmospheric, and yeah, I'm interested to see what I think of that one. So that's also on my list of ones I'm thinking I might read this month. So that is all for my October reading predictions. These are all the books that I have my eye on for the month. If you read any of these, please let me know down below what you thought of them. And if there are any of these that you're especially interested in hearing what I think of them, then let me know that as well. Thank you all for watching, and until next time, bye.